ladies and gentlemen. So now that the Dutch came, the Dutch were taken over by the English, we're going to focus in on what it means to live in colonial New York. So we're starting on page 128 in our social studies book, if you would like to get your own copy to follow along. We're looking at between the 1700s and 1760s. You're going to notice that we keep climbing up our timeline. And our vocabulary words are economy, industry, manufacturing, manor, and tenant farmer. So it looks like we've got a lot of business stuff going on. So let's go ahead and keep going with our reading. During the early and middle 1700s, New York had a growing economy that attracted many people. An economy is the way a region's people use resources to meet their needs. To meet these needs, the people of the colony had to think about three things: what goods and services to produce, how to produce them, and for whom to produce them. So that's our big idea. So we're going to look at growing industries. Many of the goods and services produced in colonial New York were used by the people of New York and the other English colonies. Other products were sent to England or Britain, as it became known. Trade and shipping became important parts of the New York's economy. Ships sailing out of New York Harbor carried fruits and vegetables, grains and meats to other colonies and to Britain. So down here it shows working on whaling ships was dangerous. Whalebone was often used to make scrimshaw or carved objects like the sailor's box above. So whales, yes, they did have to die. It was whale hunting. That is actually outlawed now. Many of New York's colonists worked in industries related to shipping. An industry includes all the businesses that make one kind of product or provide one kind of service. New York's forests provided much of the lumber needed to build ships. Whaling was another major industry in the mid-1700s. Merchants sold whale oil to Britain, where it was used as lamp fuel. In the 1740s, Philip Livingston and his son Robert began a new industry in New York when they founded an ironworks in Ancram. Workers mined iron ore there and melted it to remove the iron. Robert Livingston sold the iron to merchants in New York City and Albany. It was used in manufacturing. Remember, that helps me pronounce it. Or the making of products. Workers in New York City used iron to make nails that were used in building ships and houses. So it all comes around. Blacksmiths in Albany made iron into metal tools such as axes and plows. Most colonists worked in smaller businesses that they ran from their homes. Craftspeople produced baked goods, clothing, jewelry, wooden barrels, and rope. Many of these goods supported larger industries such as shipbuilding and trade. For example, shipbuilders climbed walkways made of rope. Merchants often packed their goods in wooden barrels, so everybody worked together. These are barrels that were used to ship goods. And down here we have an image. It says the ironworks at Ancram was successful because the raw materials needed to make iron were nearby. The area also had skilled workers to make the iron. And here's a picture of New York, and they have it zoomed in to show you Ancram. And this is just one of those signs. You're going to see a bunch of these in Owego also. They're historic signs, just telling you what that area is. This is the site of ironworks. It was the first in the colony of New York. And it had 4 forges founded by Robert R. Livingston in 1743. It was demolished in 1854, so all that's left there is the sign. And I don't know where this sign is. It's in it's a colony of New York, but it doesn't tell me. It's down in Ancram, so you would find that sign in Ancram. Town life. By 1756, Albany had more than 2,000 people and about 330 buildings. The largest of these were the English church, the Dutch church, and the city hall. Albany also had warehouses, mills, shops, and brick and wooden houses. Farmers and craftspeople took their products to the market in Albany. There, they traded with one another for farming tools and food. Merchants bought goods for both farmers and craftspeople and shipped them to New York City. Many people moved to New York City to work as lawyers, teachers, doctors, and merchants. Other people there provided services such as driving carriages, running inns, and policing city streets. By 1749, more than 13,000 people lived in New York City. Culture groups included Jews, Dutch, French, British, Germans, and free and enslaved Americans. At that time, each culture group lived in its own neighborhood with its own places of worship and schools, so they didn't mix. They were all in their own separate place. Most children went to school for 3 years. After they had finished school, they went to work in their family's business. The entire family helped run the business. So here's a picture. It says, during colonial times, children of all ages learned together in one room, hence the one-room schoolhouse. Instead of having textbooks, students studied from horn books like this one, and that's what this is right here. And down below it says a typical scene of the east side of Market Street in Albany in the early 1800s. All right, let's move over. We're going to take a peek at the picture first. This photograph of the dining room in the mansion at Van Cortlandt Park shows how it would have looked in the 1700s. What Dutch influences can you see? So just take a peek at it. Do you notice anything that was Dutch that we've learned about? Well, I think that they definitely talked about this cupboard in one of our Dutch pieces. Stone, blue and white tiles they talked about. Let's go ahead and talk about Van Cortlandt Park. In 1888, New York City gained a large part of the Van Cortlandt Manor and preserved it as a public park and historical museum. Today, Van Cortlandt Park covers 1,146 acres in the Bronx. The park has trails, ball fields, and playgrounds. The Van Cortlandt Mansion still stands in the park's southwest corner. Visitors to the Van Cortlandt Mansion can learn what life was like in New York in the 1700s and 1800s. Well, that sounds like someplace you should visit when you go to New York City. Let's talk about farm life. While many people worked in industries in cities, most made their living as farmers. Small farms lined the western bank of the Hudson River between Albany and New York City. Other farms were on Long Island and in the Bronx. Most farms covered fewer than 250 acres. Farm life remained much the same as in Dutch times. Families generally lived in small homes. Large fireplaces provided heat and a place to cook. Around the farmhouse were fields of grain and hay and herds of livestock. Farm families lived on what they raised and sold what they did not need in local markets. While most farms, oh, I'm sorry, you weren't able to see that. Oh, I guess you just got to listen that time. Sorry about that. While most farms in New York were small, there were some large farms called manors. These farms covered thousands of acres. They produced food to sell in the colonies and overseas. In the 1700s, manors owners controlled much of New York's best farmland. This gave them a powerful voice in how the colony was run. Many of them served in the colony's assembly. The Van Cortlandt family owned a manor in the Bronx. It stretched for 16 miles. That's a long distance. It's about 8 miles to Owego. It stretched for 16 miles along the Hudson River. The Van Cortlandts farmed and also milled wheat on the manor. So there's just a nice picture there. Holy cow, 16 miles. I'm not even sure what to do about that. In 1748, they built a 3-story stone house known as the Van Cortlandt Mansion. The Phillipsburg Manor lay north of the Van Cortlandt Manor, near what is now Sleepy Hollow. A wealthy merchant named Frederick Phillips owned it. Large manors like Phillipsburg required many workers. Phillips brought slaves to work in the fields, to run the mill, and to take care of the manor house. Manors like Phillipsburg also had tenant farmers. A tenant farmer was a person who farmed land belonging to a manor owner. Tenant farmers paid rent to the manor owner for the use of the manor owner's land. They also did work such as putting up barns and fences for the owner. So pretty much they were owned by the farmer, the person who owned that land. But you could farm the land and you got a livelihood off of it. Tenant farmers often had to work long days to grow enough food to feed their families and to pay their rent. In contrast, manor owners and their families had more free time. Many of the men went on hunting trips. The women enjoyed quilting parties, and families often gathered at each other's homes for dances and dinner parties. And here's our last image. A colonial family in New York might have cooked food in an iron Dutch oven, left, and drunk from silver tankards, right. All right, I believe you had a sheet where you had to fill in words. Good luck and get that done.